Hello and welcome to London Lights. I'm coming to you from the virtual lobby of the Capitol Theatre on Dundas Street. Long gone now, but obviously a beautiful place to talk about our subject today, which is the golden age of movie theaters in London, Ontario, Canada. My guest today is Randall Fuller. He is going to help me in this discussion. And by way of background, Randy lives in London, Ontario, and worked for 15 years in the movie theater business. He obtained his training as a theater manager from perhaps London's greatest movie manager and promoter, the one and only Eddie Lee. He was in the running with Bill Trudell, but Bill's not around to talk to us today, and neither is Eddie, but Randy's here. Randy, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks for having me.
Now, I understand that you managed theaters in London for 2 years and also theaters in Kitchener, Newmarket, and Sarnia. That sounds like a lot of popcorn.
Extremely a lot, yes.
And how did you enjoy your 15 years in the business?
When I started out after high school and being an usher at the movie theater in the Highland Theater in Hamilton, it became a passion of mine that I would like to pursue it. And so when I was asked to join the management team, I jumped at it. So right out of high school, I was sent here to London to under the direction of Eddie Lee, who I knew nothing about, but was soon to become a favorite acquaintance of mine. Not only a boss, but a caring boss, a teaching boss. He showed me traits that I wished that I would develop. So I looked forward to a lifetime in the movie theater. Of course, back then the movie theaters were a place of great entertainment that we wanted to make sure that you enjoyed your night out. I mean, at $3 a pop to get in for an adult, it was our duty. And of course, if you wanted to go up to the balcony, it was an extra 50 cents. But it just showed, I don't know, it was just like a dream. The ornate decor in the theaters back then was just amazing.
Well, Randy, we're going to talk about that because I do want to talk about the golden age of movie theaters in London. And of course, we have to include some discussion of the great Eddie Lee. As a young person, I remember seeing him greeting us in his tuxedo sometimes at the movie theater, the ushers having the white gloves on. I just felt so welcomed and realized I'm about to enjoy an experience that will be memorable. And that's what movie theaters and movies were like back in those days.
Yes, and if you recall, Dan, when you walked into the lobby, we had lamps on coffee tables throughout the lobby to give it that nice, warm, homey feel. But yeah, Eddie was very strict on Fridays and Saturday nights, tuxedos, be out on the floor for 6. And then when we opened the doors at 6:30, we were to stand in the lobby, Eddie and me beside him. And if we had a trainee manager, them also, we stood beside to greet everybody as they came in. And also very important that we stood in the lobby as the people left, as our patrons left the theater, just to get any comments that they had, whether they didn't enjoy it or whether they did enjoy it. But he was very strict on meeting the public.
Well, that's fantastic. I still love going to the movies, but I got to tell you, when I go these days, I'm not even sure who the manager is.
Exactly.
Some guy in the back room pulling strings. I don't know. But Mr. Lee was right out front. He was there to welcome you and give you this warm feeling of invitation. And it really was a special thing.
And in a crowd, Dan, if you didn't know where Eddie was, you just listened for his hearty laugh and you could pick him out in the crowd anywhere and you knew where Eddie was.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now, listen, I've identified the golden age of movie theaters, palaces really, as the years from 1920s to the 1990s. 1990 was the time when the video cassette recorder became available in people's homes. The TVs started to get a little bigger. The signal to TVs was getting a little bit bigger. and there was perhaps a slow demise of movie theaters as a major source of entertainment for most people. And also by that time, in an effort to maximize profits, some chains started to carve up their movie theaters into multiplexes, and those, in some way, took away some of the uniqueness for me. But would you agree with me that the golden age of theaters would be that period right around 1990 through 1920 through 1990?
Yes, exactly. And the Odeon company knew that that was happening, and the way to go then was doubling the theaters, multiplex, if you will. But at that time, I think we were only considering dueling theaters. So the Odeon was not left out, and Eddie was approached, and they had meetings, and they thought, you know what? We think that we can turn the Odeon theater just like the Capitol were side by side, Capitol 1 and 2. Um, we could change the Odeon into a piggyback theater, close off the balcony, put a new screen at the top, and show that as Odeon 2. Keep the original screen downstairs in the big theater without too much loss of seat, because that theater held 1,500 people. And as you saw the demise, it was very rare to get a full house anymore. I mean, movies in its time, like the Centurion ones, like Ben-Hur and stuff like that, they would sell out those theaters.
Let me stop you there because I want to give a short history of cinema. Cinema really began in 1890 when moving pictures were shown at expositions, sometimes in outdoor tents. And in 1902, the first permanent motion picture theater opened in Los Angeles, a place called Tally's. In 1905, the first storefront Nickelodeon opened up in Pittsburgh in the front of a store there. And movie palaces began to be built in the 1920s and 1930s. And we're talking palaces, stunning, glamorous, ornate palaces with people would be dressing to the nines to attend the movie theaters. Look at the lobby behind me. I mean, it's just a stunning, beautiful approach to the movies. And of course, this was accelerated when sound came to movie in 1927 with the jazz singer. So by 1930, movie attendance was reaching 90 million visitors per week in the USA and Canada. Drive-in theaters were introduced in 1933. The Odeon Theater, where you worked, was built in 1948. And by 1955, half of all homes had black and white television. But these were small, crude devices. I still remember having to adjust the rabbit ears on top of the TV to get a channel. So movie theaters were still flourishing, and they were still the place to go. But in 1963, the first multiplex opened in Missouri in a shopping mall that would seat 700 people. And then color television came in 1965. So you can see the development of competition for movie theaters. IMAX 3D opened in Toronto in 1971. And then perhaps one of the biggest factors that developed was the proliferation of cable television. In the 1980s, the video cassette recorder became available to almost every home. Movie theaters remained popular, and they had very good products compared to some of the poorer quality pictures on TV. In 1997, the Titanic by James Cameron of Fort Erie, Ontario, was a high grossing movie that grossed millions, perhaps the biggest grossing movie of all time. But in 2002, the great Capitol Theater was closed, and eventually it was abolished. Big screen TVs were coming to TV, to people's homes. Streaming was coming to their homes, giving all kinds of other entertainment options. So by 2015, movie attendance was dipping by 30%. And in 2020, COVID shut down the industry entirely. So as we sit here today and talk about this topic, the future of cinema and movie theaters is uncertain, Randy. Do you think there's a future for cinema?
I don't think you can ever top the escapism when you go into a movie theater and you're sitting in that great big auditorium in the darkness, and you've got a huge screen. you can't buy a screen that big for your living room. It's a night out. I know it's expensive now, but the smell of popcorn, and sitting in that huge theater, you escape the realism for a bit. You know, like you just
Exactly.
can sit down and relax and have a good time. So I think that's always going to be there. Yeah, yes, you can see the movies at home sometimes even before it hits a theater nowadays, but there's nothing like going out to a movie theater.
Well, Randy, you're exactly right. And I look at this lobby behind me and I remember walking down that long lobby. It's like you're leaving all your troubles behind you out on the street and you're entering this insulated world of the beautiful movie theater with the huge screen, everything left behind. In fact, I've created a little movie theater in my basement with a popcorn maker just to try and recreate that tremendous sense that you get from going to the movies. And I really hope and I have to believe there's still a future for cinema. But when we come back, we do have to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, I want to talk about your work with the great promoter, movie manager, Eddie Lee. Tell us more about his story. Uh, Such a great guy, a guy that I can still clearly remember in my own memory. He never, he didn't know me from a hole in the wall, but he made a huge impression on me as one of his customers. So we'll be right back. Viewers, stay with us. We're here with Randy Fuller, and we're going to be talking about the golden age of movie theaters in London, Ontario. Okay, I'm Dan Mailer, and we're back at London Lights with our guest, Randy Fuller. Now, Randy, what year did you get started in the movie theater business? And what year did you come to London to train under London's great Eddie Lee?
I started in 71 and was sent right to London, fresh out of high school, not knowing anybody here. Um, and I was to start as Eddie Lee's trainee manager. And I remember arriving in London, supposedly at the Hotel London, which I didn't know was demolished until I got here. So I ended up getting a room at the Esquire Hotel on Dundas and Wellington. Of course, like when you open the door to your room, you're hitting the bed. That's how small it was. But so I thought I'd walk down to have a look at this Odeon theater in London that was um, held by Eddie Lee, manager or extraordinaire. I heard I was in for the best training of my life, and I'm thinking, okay, let's see. So I walked down to the theater, and I thought, oh, looks pretty classy. I like the showcase display windows out in the front before like right at the entranceway. Great big wide foyer, and the box office way up in the corner to the left. So anyway, I walked around, introduced myself, and they said, "Oh, come on in." So I went in, still not knowing Eddie, but I thought, "Wow, what a nice theater!" And I kind of looked to my right, and I saw this man, older gentleman, on the phone, and I guess he was talking to the cashier who was saying, "Your trainee manager is here." And so he immediately put the phone down and came out smiling and chuckling and saying, "Randy, Randy, I expected you, but not this early," and shook my hand. He won me over right off the
Wow.
bat.
Well, tell me, what was Mr. Lee like? You've described him to me before, and I've met him personally, but tell us in your own words, what made him so special?
He had the personality that everyone thinks that they would like to have. He would make you comfortable within seconds of meeting him. That after that handshake, he won you over. And yet he was brutally honest. Like, he'd say, "Randy, nice to meet you. Your tie's crooked." And so you'd fix it, but you didn't take offense to it because he always did it in such a reassuring. What Eddie Lee was just a super guy, um, and I was honored to be accepted into him. Not only him, but his wife Irene was the matron at the theater, because we were a continuous run theater, which meant we opened at 1 and we had shows at 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and then on Sundays we stopped at the 8 o'clock, because the buses in London stopped at 10 o'clock on Sunday night, so we had to accommodate our bus travelers. But um, Irene was the matron, and then eventually April and Shanna, his daughters, became concession girls. So it was a family affair, and yet you felt like one of his family, just by being in his employ. He was unforgettable.
Some of the descriptions you gave to me during our pre-interview talk were that he was immaculate, he was posh, he was a perfectionist, he was a showman, larger than life. Theater was his life. And you told me about the wonderful Oscar parties that he would hold with other managers at his house. What were they like?
Amazing. He'd have it in the backyard, and he had a little pond in his backyard, and floating on the lily pads would be tea light candles, and even the napkins would have Oscars on them. He spent time in giving you an Oscar book that with all the quizzes in it, and of course prizes, the finger food. If you didn't dress up, you felt out of place, because he gave such a great, and yet he never ever made you feel like that. He welcomed you no matter what.
Yeah, and going to the movies was just a fantastic experience back in the day. And I'm sure Londoners who grew up in this city have fond memories of going to the movies. Let me just mention some of the movies that we're all familiar with and have probably all attended. So the Lowe's London Theatre, which became the Century, was at 194 Dundas Street, built in the 1920s. In the early days, it was a vaudeville theater. W.C. Fields performed there. George Burns, Gracie Allen. The Lombardos did their benefit concert there in 1937. Nearby was the Capitol Theater at 204 Dundas. It opened in February 1920, became the Capitol later on, and closed in 2002. It showed the blockbuster movie, the one seen behind me, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I believe the first cartoon, full-length cartoon, which Disney took a gamble on and paid off big. Bill Trudell, Bill Trudell managed that theater, and again, a high class, excellent promoter of movies. Then you had the Park Theater at 710 Dundas Street, built in 1929. It became the Palace Theater, still there today for plays. We had the Mall Theater at 391 Clarence Street. It was built in 1939, became the mall in 1969, closed in 1985. There was the Patricia Theater at 423 Clarence. I've never seen that one, but my dad told me he went there to see Roy Rogers a number of times. 1,000 seats, and that was just north of Dundas Street on Clarence. The Highland Theater, which was built in the 1930s as the Elmwood Theater on Warncliffe Road, it was bought by Odeon in 1959. Showed The Sound of Music there for a year and a half. No other movie, just The Sound of Music for 73 weeks in 1965. The Odeon Theater, as you mentioned, 243 Dundas Street, built in 1948 and demolished in the late 1980s. The manager of that theater was Eddie Lee. There was the Savoy Theater, the Rex Theater on Hamilton Road. And then there were the numerous multiplexes that came along in the 1980s and 90s. Huron Marketplace, Westmount Cinemas, Silver City. That's a lot of theaters. People in London love the movies.
They did. And when you mentioned that, you know, the multiplex, the one out on
Huron.
right, Eddie was transferred to there eventually. Eddie looked after the Odeon Theater until its closure, and he was transferred to the Huron Market, and you could tell he wasn't happy. Gone were the days of showmanship. I mean, you had 6 theaters, to just advertise one in a promotion when Eddie promoted a movie, he promoted a movie. For instance, Car Wash. When he got the movie Car Wash, he did a promotion that was so fantastic. It won him the automobile of his choice over in the States. It was that good. He was that kind of a showman. You couldn't beat him.
Well, my own experience was promotion was a big part of movies back in the day. And in the 1960s, maybe early 70s, there was a promotion on, and I was inspired to build a lunar lantern module for a contest at the Highland Theater, which Eddie Lee was associated with.
Yeah.
And I remember, a young guy just putting this model together, putting some sand together under the lunar lander, and I won the contest. I won a free album from Bluebird Records. I won 6 tickets to take all my friends to see the movie Marooned, the space movie, and something else. And I just remember thinking, wow, it was just something that I have never forgotten. And to find out later that Eddie Lee was the promoter behind all that just spoke to me that he touched my life in a way that I'll never forget. And did he pass on this promotional talent to you?
Oh my God, Dan, are you kidding me? I made it a point that in my career, when I became theater manager of my own theater, I would beat this Eddie Lee in the showmanship. Every 2 years, the head office would have a meeting of all the Ontario theater managers. We would meet in a specified town. Eddie Lee hosted us one year, but we'd meet in Toronto at the Carlton Theater, where our head office was, which was right next to Maple Leaf Gardens. And I made it a point that I was going to beat him in showmanship the last thing I did. So the one year that I did, I thought, now I've made it. Now I'm on even plane. I can now call him Eddie, but I still couldn't bring myself to call him Eddie because he was Mr. Lee to me. And he'd always correct me, say, Randy, it's Eddie. You can call me Eddie. I said, yeah, okay, Mr. Lee, Eddie. So I mean, he just was the main reason why I stayed in theater.
That's great. And obviously he passed on that talent to you.
Oh
And before
gosh,
I,
yes.
before I forget, I want to thank Barry Wells, who wrote an article about Mr. Lee that can be found online somewhere if you look hard enough. And it's, again, a wonderful tribute to the man. He also provided a number of photos for this program. So thank you, Mr. Wells, for that. I also spoke to Mr. Lee's daughter, April,
Yes.
and we had the greatest chat. And she said that his 25th anniversary, I believe, of his death was coming up. And they were so happy to hear that somebody was in some way, some small way, going to recognize her father. And she had many of these similar great memories that you've talked to us about. So again, what was it like? It's opening night now for a new movie. I got to think Mr. Lee is all excited. It's usually a Friday night. And what kind of ship does he run to get the ship sailing in the right direction on a Friday night with a big movie opening?
Well, on a Friday night, of course, as you say, was a big night. And if a Friday night was successful with the amount of people, you usually doubled that amount, and that's what was going to be your number on Saturday night. So if you had a full house Friday night, you knew Saturday was going to be doubled with the run over and people having to stand in line until the next movie. But Friday night, out came the freshly dry cleaned white gloves for the ushers that had to wear the gloves, and along with a flashlight that worked, and knowledge of what seats were empty to actually usher people down to their seats. And so from buying a ticket from one of the cashiers, and my wife was a cashier at the Odeon, and I met her there. But anyway, you'd buy a ticket from her, you would go, and it would be ripped in half by the usher with the white gloves, and then you were met at the door. Eddie and I would be standing there watching everything. You don't dare make a mistake, or else would pull you aside and say, "Are you kidding? You know what's going on?"
Randy, we're almost out of time, and there's
Oh,
one quick story I want to get in. You told me a very funny story about a young man that came in with a van of kids from a home in one of the Newmarket theater
Yes,
that you managed, and
yes.
the kid caused some trouble for you. Tell me that story real quick.
Every Friday night. Well, the Pickering Boys School was up on the hill in Newmarket, right next to the Newmarket High School. And every Friday I would get a call from the headmaster at Pickering College, and he would say, yes, Mr. Fuller, is it okay if we send a van of boys down to the movie? And I would give them a deal because they would come in, and there'd be about 8 of them, and they would sit in the back. Well, there was one kid that was never, I don't think he ever saw a full movie, because the usher would come up to Mr. Fuller, that young kid is acting up again, and he'd be standing up and making, so I'd have to call him out, sit him in the lobby, and say, you sit there for the rest of the movie now so you won't disrupt the other people.
And do you remember his
Well,
name, Randy?
yes, it happened to be Jim Carrey of movie theme, movie thing, because he mentioned it when he was asked, well, did you ever go to the movies when you were going to school in Newmarket? He goes, yes, but I never saw one. You know, like I'd see the beginning, but then this manager made me sit out in the lobby because I was unruly. Jim Carrey.
Randy, I got to let you go. We're out of time. Thanks for being here to talk about a very special time in London, Ontario, and in the lives of all of us. Going to the movies, always a great experience. Thanks again for your time, and take care.
It was my pleasure. Thanks, Dan.